At the grand midnight hall, an auction shrouded in elegance hides secrets darker than the treasures on display. Who bids with greed, and who hides a crime behind the hammer's fall? Welcome to Archie's diary. Before we begin the mystery, prepare your mind, settle in, and let the mystery begin. Trouble doesn't always kick in doors or scream headlines. Sometimes it shows up neat, folded, and riding in on the Morning Post. That Tuesday, at 11 o'clock sharp, Trouble arrived at the brownstone on West 35th Street wearing French perfume and expensive stationery. It was Fritz who delivered it, and Fritz doesn't do mail like a regular houseman. He carries it on a silver tray the way most people handle crown jewels, which tells me he didn't care for this particular delivery. He set the tray down with the kind of finality he usually reserves for announcing that Wolfe has refused to eat something green. I was at my desk, flipping through the latest phone book while pretending to work. Wolfe was behind his, a stack of tomes about Persian dynasties surrounding him like fortress walls. He hadn't spoken for 15 minutes, which meant either he was deep in Mesopotamia or trying to forget my existence. "Archie," Wolfe said without looking up. His voice came out smooth, heavy, like honey on a cold spoon. The aroma suggests indiscretion or blackmail. "Open it." He could smell it from across the room. That's Wolfe for you. A nose that can detect time from tarragon at 20 paces, and a mind that never lets an odor arrive without filing it under category and motive. I picked up the envelope. Heavy paper, cream-colored, thick enough to choke a letter opener. The handwriting on the front belonged in a museum of illuminated manuscripts, looping and deliberate. Whoever wrote it wanted the reader to know they were educated, wealthy, or crazy enough to imitate both. Inside, one sheet, one sentence. The auction at Midnight Hall will cost a man his life. Prevent it or collect the consequences. A friend. I read it out loud, then let out a low whistle. Somebody's writing bad theater scripts again. Should I file this under cranks or fortune tellers? Wolfe raised his eyes, slow as a king who had all the time in the world. He gave me that look, the one that could cut through stone walls and didn't need words to tell me he was taking it seriously. "There is no economy," he said, in disregarding an explicit promise of death. "Even if floridly phrased, sure," I said. "But there's a long line of florid phrasing in this city." Midnight Hall, huh? That's not in the guidebook I keep for tourists. Any idea? He set the letter down on his desk blotter, smoothing it flat with 2 fingers. "Your resourcefulness, Archie, will provide clarification. I will not expend further conjecture until you have done so. Translation: I was going out. Wolfe wasn't. Business as usual." I tucked the letter into my jacket pocket, but not before giving it another sniff. Wolfe was right. The perfume clung to the paper. Expensive, European, not the sort of stuff you find in a drugstore. Something about it lingered sharp, like citrus with a bite of smoke. "Some dame wrote this," I said, "and not the type who takes the subway." Your capacity for inference improves marginally when provided a fragrance, Wolfe muttered. He picked up his book again, effectively dismissing me. Before heading out, I paused by the door. Suppose I find out Midnight Hall is a cocktail lounge with a floor show. Am I allowed to catch the act, or is this strictly a no-fun assignment? His lips twitched, Wolfe's version of a smirk. "Archie, your amusements are your own concern. Do not permit them to interfere with results." That was as close to a blessing as I'd get. I stepped out into the early autumn air. New York had that in-between season smell. Roasted chestnuts from a cart, damp leaves clogging gutters, gasoline mixing with the faint salt edge of the Hudson. A breeze cut down the street carrying voices, car horns, and the faint tap of a shoe shine brush somewhere nearby. Midnight Hall. The name alone sounded like a place where nothing good ever happened before sunrise. A dance club, a theater, maybe a private residence with a lot more mystery than rent control. My first stop was a phone booth down the block. The Manhattan directory wasn't much help. Hall Midnight wasn't listed between Halifax Diner and Halloran Plumbing. That left me with the other kind of search. The kind that required shoe leather and questions in bars where people pretended not to hear you. I started with Lon Cohen at the Gazette. A quick dime call, his voice all business. Archie, if you're asking me about Midnight Hall, you're not the first. It's not a nightclub. It's an estate. An old one out on Long Island. Belonged to the late Vandermeer family. Word is they're auctioning off the contents next week. Some kind of midnight spectacle for collectors and the idle rich that lined up with the stationery and the perfume. If the Vandermeer place was holding an auction at midnight, it wasn't to get rid of silverware. It was to make people feel like they were buying history out of a crypt. Anybody ever get killed there before? I asked. Not yet, Lon said, but I'll print the story if it happens. I thanked him and hung up, a sour taste forming at the back of my throat. A midnight auction in a mansion dripping with family ghosts. That was the kind of backdrop murder liked to sneak into. By the time I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe hadn't moved an inch. He was still behind his desk, a mountain of calm. Fritz was setting out beer and cheese, the afternoon ritual. Well? Wolfe asked, not bothering with greetings. It's not a nightclub, I said. It's the Vandermeer estate. They're unloading the family relics under the moonlight. Collectors, dealers, and assorted jackals will be bidding. Wolfe shut his book, a rare gesture. Midnight, a most inconvenient hour. And yet, he leaned back, closing his eyes. Archie, the letter is bait. The question is, for what fish? I didn't like the sound of that. Trouble was already in our laps, and the hook was set. All that was left was finding out who was holding the line. The letter still sat on Wolfe's blotter like a poisonous bloom that refused to wilt. He'd left it there deliberately, which meant he wanted its perfume and promise of murder to seep into the room until it stained the wood. Wolfe doesn't forget things. He lets them marinate until they're tender enough to carve. Lunch was an hour away, but Wolfe stirred before the clock had a chance to save him. He shifted in his chair, eyes narrowing at the ceiling as if the plaster might provide a clue. If the Vandermeer estate is indeed conducting an auction, then there must be catalogues. Obtain one. That was all. No discussion about what we do with it, no expression of curiosity about the sender of the letter, just a command dropped like a stone into still water. I said, Saul can... No. Saul Panzer is a precision instrument. Do not misuse him. Catalogues are for public consumption. Acquire one translation. Hit the pavement. I phoned Rennie Faber, a Madison Avenue antiques dealer who had the personality of a dust rag, but kept his ear close to the ground. If a flea market in New Jersey turned up a Louis XVI footstool, Rennie knew about it before the varnish dried. Sure enough, he confirmed he had a Vandermeer catalogue, printed and bound with all the trimmings. I told him to hold it and make tracks. The sidewalks were clogged, the kind of midtown traffic that could sour your mood before you'd walked a block. A breeze carried yesterday's rain mixed with hot pretzels and a dash of exhaust fumes, New York's version of perfume. By the time I ducked into Rennie's shop, my collar felt like it had been pressed with steam. Rennie was perched behind his counter with a cigarette hanging from his lip, one eye squinting through the smoke. He had the catalogue laid open like a priest opening scripture. He tapped it with a yellowed finger. You'll want to see this, Archie. It's not a garage sale. Vandermeers are emptying ghosts. He was right. The catalogue pages gleamed with photographs of treasures that looked more suited to a museum than an auction block. Jeweled boxes, tapestries, oil paintings of stern men and women who'd never smiled a day in their lives. But halfway through, a listing snagged me. Lot 73. Private Journals of the Vandermeer Patriarch, circa 1880s. Condition fragile. Contents unspecified. When people sell journals, it's usually because they either don't know what's in them or know too much. "What's the guest list?" I asked. Rennie blew smoke at the ceiling. "You didn't hear it from me, but I know a few names. The Channings will be there. Fifth Avenue blue bloods with wallets as thick as cement. Lionel Sayers, the theater man who keeps stringing lights even when the actors forget their lines. And Adria Kestrel." "Kestrel," I repeated. The name carried weight, the kind you hear at parties where champagne costs more than rent. "She collects art like most people collect air," Rennie said. "Pays too much, smiles too little, and leaves everyone wondering why." That gave me 3 people to look at under a magnifying glass. I took the catalogue, thanked Rennie, and worked my way back into the city tide. By the time I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms with his orchids, the only living things he ever bent for. I gave him the highlights, the catalogue, the private journals, and the names. He grunted, which is Wolfe for continue. "The auction starts at midnight, runs until dawn, invite only. The crowd's going to be rich, bored, and hungry for more than antiques. If someone wants to stage a murder, it's the perfect time." Archie. His eyes closed, and he leaned back in his chair like a judge resting between verdicts. "The auction is merely theatre. The performers are our concern. Their motives will provide substance. You will inquire." So I inquired. First stop was Lionel Sayers. His office downtown smelled of velvet and stale cigars, the kind of scent that clings to old theaters even when the curtain hasn't gone up in years. Sayers was tall and narrow, with a voice like an oboe. Strained, apologetic, but carrying. "Yes, I'll be there," he said when I dropped Vandermeer's name. His fingers twitched around a pen, tapping it against his desk. "There's a Flemish portrait I have my eye on. But threats? Death? Really, Mr. Goodwin, that's ridiculous. It would have been more convincing if his eyes hadn't darted away like pigeons spotting a cat." I filed him under nervous, maybe hiding something. Next were the Channings. Old money, older attitude. Their Fifth Avenue townhouse had enough marble to start a quarry. Mrs. Channing received me, pearls around her neck like armor. "The Vandermeer auction is of great importance," she said with the faintest hint of disdain, as though I had insulted her by asking, "My husband and I intend to ensure certain pieces remain within circles of taste. As for danger, nonsense. People will gossip. We rise above it," which was her way of saying she knew more but wouldn't hand it over for free. She didn't dismiss me outright, though, which meant she had some interest in what Wolfe and I were sniffing at. Adria Kestrel was the hardest to pin down. She turned up at a gallery opening on West End Avenue, dressed in black silk that moved like smoke. She looked at me the way a hawk looks at a mouse it hasn't decided whether to eat. "Midnight Hall?" she said with a smile that could have been carved. "Darling, of course I'll be there. Everyone who matters will. The Vandermeers are selling ghosts, and I adore ghosts." "Murder?" She tilted her head, considering. "If it happens, perhaps it adds to the theatre." I walked out with goose flesh. Some people play games with cards or dice. Kestrel played with people's pulses. When I reported back, Wolfe was waiting in his chair, glass of beer at hand. He listened to my notes, fingers steepled, eyes half shut. "So," I said, "a theatre man who sweats too easily, a society matron who pretends she doesn't care, and a collector who practically invites bloodshed. Take your pick. Their motives are not yet apparent," Wolfe said. "But the letter came here, Archie. We were chosen. That implies orchestration." He tapped the blotter where the perfumed note still lay. "The writer knows me. Knows us. It is bait, and we have swallowed it. The question remains, are we to be reeled in, or to reel the fishermen instead?" He closed his eyes again, settling like a stone into the riverbed. But I knew he was listening to the current. Whoever had written that letter thought Wolfe could be maneuvered like a pawn on a chessboard. They were in for a rude surprise. The next day began with Wolfe doing what he does best, ignoring the outside world. He was upstairs with the orchids, communing with them in that low rumble he saves for plants, and scolding me. I left him there, though not before reminding him twice that we had a murder threat hanging over our heads. His answer was a glare that translated neatly into, "Do your job, Archie, and let me do mine." So I did my job. I had 3 names and a catalogue description that smelled funny, and if Wolfe wanted motives, I'd wring them out of the people attached to those names. My first stop was back downtown with Lionel Sayers. The theatre man looked worse than the day before, eyes ringed in red and skin damp with the kind of sweat that doesn't come from heat. "I told you everything," he said, voice fluttering like an understudy on opening night. "The portrait is all I want. I've been hunting it for years. Nothing else." "Sure," I said, leaning on his desk. "But tell me this. Who's after it besides you? You looked jumpy yesterday, and jumpy people usually have competition." He stiffened. That was enough. "Adria Kestrel," he admitted after a pause. "She buys to spite. If she thinks I want something, she'll raise her paddle just to watch me suffer." His hands clenched into fists. "I won't let her." The way he said it, with a flash of something too sharp to be dismissed as nerves, made me wonder how far he'd go to keep a painting out of her hands. From there, I headed north to find Adria herself. She was in her gallery again, black silk exchanged for grey wool, but with the same air of superiority, as if the walls bowed in her direction. When I mentioned Lionel, her lips curved into a smile that was colder than an empty church. "Poor Lionel," she said. "He wants to own history, but he has no taste. The Flemish portrait is wasted on him. It belongs in my collection, where it will be seen and loved. He mistakes desire for entitlement." Her tone was calm, but I could hear the venom underneath. If Sayers saw her as his tormentor, she saw him as her sport. "Would you stop at raising a paddle just to watch him squirm?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Isn't that what auctions are for?" It was too smooth, too rehearsed. People who play games with money rarely stop there. The Channings were last. I caught Mr. Channing this time, an older man with a thin frame and sharper eyes than his wife. We sat in a study lined with more books than Wolfe's, which was saying something. "The Vandermeer journals are of particular interest," he said when I nudged him. "Old records, perhaps financial. If they contain information damaging to families still prominent, well, discretion would be wise." That was the first straight hint of motive I'd heard. Those journals weren't just relics. They were potential dynamite. Whoever got them could control stories better left buried. By evening, I was back at the brownstone, dropping my notes in Wolfe's lap like a grocery list. He listened without interruption, except to take a long swallow of beer. "So," I finished, "Sayers wants a portrait and hates that Kestrel might steal it. Kestrel wants to own it just to break him, and the Channings want the journals, which might carry secrets worth more than gold." Wolfe set down the glass. "Sayers is obvious. Kestrel is malicious. The Channings are pragmatic. It is the last category that concerns me most," I was about to argue when something else occurred to me. The letter. I pulled it from my pocket. Whoever wrote this didn't say who'd die. They just said a man. Could mean Sayers, could mean someone else. Maybe the journal's names worth killing over Wolfe's eyes opened a fraction wider. A possibility. He tapped the arm of his chair. "Archie, examine the catalogue again. Lot 73. The journals, who will benefit most from silencing them?" I had to admit it could be any of them, but one thing was clear. If the journals went up for auction, blood might follow. That night, I filed away my notes and tried to settle with a beer of my own. The brownstone was quiet, Fritz humming in the kitchen, the air thick with the smell of garlic and parsley. For a moment, it felt almost safe. Then I noticed the letter on Wolfe's blotter had shifted. It lay at an angle it hadn't held before, and Wolfe hadn't touched it. I knew because Wolfe doesn't touch things twice unless necessary. "Wolfe," I said, "someone's been in here." His eyes narrowed, the weight of them settling on the paper. "Describe." "The envelope's off. I left it square on the blotter this morning. Now it's tilted." Fritz wouldn't move. Which means someone else had fingers on your desk. Wolfe's face darkened. For him, that was the equivalent of thunder. "Our trespasser is reckless," he said. "They sought confirmation that the bait had been taken." That is intolerable. I checked the locks, the windows, every corner of the office. Nothing else was touched. Just the letter. That made it worse. Whoever had come in wasn't after money, wasn't after Wolfe's books or Fritz's silver. They wanted to remind us we were under observation. "Archie." Wolfe's voice was cold, final. "We are not spectators. We are now participants. Increase your vigilance. Our adversary has crossed my threshold. For that, I will have satisfaction." I nodded because what else was there to say? The brownstone was sacred ground. Whoever had crossed into it had declared war. The scent of the letter still clung to the air, sharper now, mixed with the faint memory of a stranger's hand. And I knew this case had shifted gears. It wasn't just about the Vandermeer auction anymore. It was about Wolfe's pride. And that was something no trespasser should ever gamble against. When Wolfe says the brownstone's been trespassed, you don't take it lightly. For him, the office isn't just an office. It's a temple, and that blotter with the perfumed letter might as well have been an altar. The fact that someone had the gall to walk in and tilt it a few degrees was worse than if they'd stolen the safe. Wolfe could forgive theft. He couldn't forgive violation. I checked the locks again. The front door had no marks, no scratches. The windows were shut, bolts secure. The intruder hadn't forced anything, which meant either they had a key or they had cooperation. I didn't like either answer. Wolfe sat with his eyes closed, fingers steepled, a look that suggested he was cataloguing possibilities like a librarian arranging dusty volumes. He finally said, "Archie, find out who delivered the letter." I frowned. The postman, sure. But this wasn't ordinary. Fritz brought it on a tray. You think it was slipped through some other channel? "Of course," Wolfe said. "Our adversary wishes to ensure we feel chosen. That is not accomplished by anonymous mailmen. Trace its origin." So I did. The following morning, I walked to the local post office, catalogue tucked under my arm for cover. I flashed the envelope at a clerk I'd bought coffee for once or twice, and he confirmed what I suspected. It hadn't gone through their system. No postage mark, no sorting stamp. Whoever sent it had bypassed the mail entirely, which meant the sender, or a messenger, had delivered it straight to us. That narrowed the suspects to anyone who knew Wolfe's address, and in New York, that wasn't as exclusive as you'd hope. Still, it gave me a thread. I tugged on it by checking with the doorman in the building next door, a man who smoked like a chimney and noticed more than he let on. Odd, said he'd seen a woman in a dark coat slip up to our stoop the morning the letter arrived. Tall, slim, carrying herself like she owned the street. That could have been Kestrel, but it wasn't proof. I needed more. By the time I got back, Wolfe had polished off 2 bottles of beer and was knee-deep in orchids. He listened without blinking as I laid it out. "So somebody hand-delivered it," I said, "and a neighbor saw a tall woman in a dark coat. If that was Kestrel, she's sending invitations to her own murder mystery party, but it could have been somebody else playing dress-up." "Adria Kestrel enjoys theater," Wolfe said, "but leaving perfume on the paper is unsubtle. She plays deeper games. Still, possibility remains. We must not dismiss. At that moment, the bell rang. Fritz answered and ushered in none other than Lionel Sayers. He looked worse than yesterday. Sallow, eyes wide. The kind of look a man gets when he's seen a shadow that follows too closely. "I had to come," he said, collapsing into the red leather chair across from Wolfe's desk. "Someone was in my office last night, papers scattered, a sketch of the portrait gone." His hands trembled as he reached for his pocket, pulling out a scrap of paper. "This was left behind." He passed it to me, a torn page with the same looping script as our letter. It said only, "The price of desire is blood." Wolfe took it between two fingers as though it might stain. "Did you inform the police?" "No," Sayers said quickly. "I can't. The press would ruin me. I thought, well, you solved things before. You can stop this." Wolfe closed his eyes, considering. "Someone wishes to impress upon you that your acquisition of the portrait will lead to calamity. You are rattled. That pleases them." "It terrifies me," Sayers snapped. I watched Wolfe carefully. He doesn't rise to emotion. He let Sayers flail until the man's words ran out, then said, "You will attend the auction. You will bid on the portrait as you intended. To do otherwise would concede power. Do not contact me again until you have something useful." Sayers looked like he wanted to argue, but Wolfe's glare has a way of shutting mouths faster than a trap door. He left, hunched and broken, leaving behind the faint smell of smoke and panic. When the door closed, Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, we are being maneuvered. These messages, one to us, one to Sayers, suggest a campaign. Someone is playing puppeteer, tugging strings to incite fear." "Yeah," I said, "and the puppets are dancing. Next thing you know, Kestrel will have her turn, or the Channings." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Anticipate it." That night, Fritz prepared a dinner of braised duck, which usually keeps Wolfe docile. Not this time. He ate with his usual precision, but his eyes were far away. When we returned to the office, I noticed the blotter again. The letter hadn't moved this time, but something else had. One of Wolfe's pens, a heavy Mont Blanc, sat an inch out of place. Wolfe's gaze fixed on it, and his lips tightened. "They returned," he said softly. I checked the locks. Again, nothing. No scratches, no tampering. Whoever was coming in had a way we didn't know about, or someone was letting them in while we weren't looking. "Saul," Wolfe said. I raised a brow. "You want him on it now?" "Yes. Discreet surveillance of the brownstone. Whoever trespasses will reveal themselves when they believe we are absent. Saul will observe I phoned Panzer, and he agreed without fuss. If anyone could shadow an invisible intruder, it was him." The next morning, I went back to the Channings. I wanted to see if anything had rattled them. Mrs. Channing was serene as ever, pearls in place, tea steaming beside her. But when I mentioned journals again, her eyes flickered. "They are trifles," she said too quickly. "Old men's ramblings, hardly worth blood." That was the first time she'd mentioned blood without me bringing it up. When I returned, Wolfe listened, brow furrowed. "She betrays concern. If those journals contain family indiscretions, she would conceal it." Her denial was clumsy. As if on cue, the phone rang. Fritz answered and handed it to me. The voice on the other end was low, deliberate. "Tell Wolfe," it said, "that at Midnight Hall the highest bidder won't live to see the dawn." Then the line went dead. I repeated it word for word. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, hands folded. "The trespasses, the letters, the calls," he murmured. "Our adversary increases pressure, escalating with each contact. They seek to demonstrate inevitability." His eyes opened, sharp as blades. "But inevitability is a myth. Archie, it is time we began to shape events ourselves. We shall not merely respond, we shall act, And when Wolfe says we shall act, it means the game is about to tilt. When Wolfe says we shall act, it means I get the exercise. He stays planted in his chair, moving nothing but lips and fingers, while I wear out shoe leather and risk indigestion at lunch counters that serve mystery stew. Saul Panzer was already on the job, watching the brownstone from angles even pigeons would envy, so my task was to keep needling suspects until one of them slipped. Wolfe always says people trip themselves up faster than you can push them, if you let them talk. I started with Lionel Sayers again. The theatre man was turning into a case study in perspiration. His office smelled worse than yesterday, and his desk had been scrubbed in a hurry, as though he hoped wiping down wood could erase fear. He jumped when I opened the door, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. "You again," he muttered. "I've told you everything." "Not quite," I said, sitting down without invitation. "The note you got, the one warning about blood, looked a lot like the one Wolfe received. Same handwriting, same flair, for melodrama. Why do you suppose our mystery friend is sending double doses?" He looked at me blankly, then swallowed hard. "Because they want me frightened. Because they think I'll give up." His voice cracked, then steadied. "But I won't. The portrait is mine." "Funny thing," I said, watching him closely. "Kestrel told me she'd bid on it just to see you sweat. She didn't mention blood. She didn't sound scared. She sounded like a woman enjoying herself. So why are you the one trembling?" He stood, fists on the desk. "Because she doesn't understand. She wants to ruin me. That portrait—" He stopped, biting the words. "That portrait what?" He turned away, shoulders stiff. "Nothing. Just a painting. Leave it." But his tone told me it wasn't just paint and canvas. Something tied him to that portrait deeper than taste. I filed it away. From there, I went uptown, back to the Channings. I caught Mr. Channing again, though he didn't look thrilled to see me. He tried the usual routine of offering me tea and ending the interview before it started. But I pressed. "Your wife says the journals are trifles," I said. "You hinted otherwise." "Which is it?" He adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing. "Journals of the past are curiosities, but sometimes curiosities contain truths, and truths can be unpleasant." "Unpleasant for who?" I asked. "For families who prefer silence to scandal." His gaze sharpened. "Why are you asking? Do you intend to bid against us?" "I intend to keep my employer breathing past sunrise," I said. That got me a flicker of surprise. He hadn't expected me to put it that bluntly. He recovered fast, but the crack showed. He cared a lot more about those journals than he wanted admitted. The last visit was the one I dreaded but couldn't dodge. Adria Kestrel. She had a talent for making me feel like a bug she might pin to velvet. I found her in a cafe this time, stirring coffee she probably didn't plan to drink. When I slid into the seat across from her, she smiled like she'd been expecting me. "Mr. Goodwin," she said smoothly. "Does Wolfe send you, or do you come of your own curiosity?" "A bit of both," I said. "I hear you've taken an interest in Flemish art." "Ah, Lionel's portrait. He clings to it like a drowning man. But tell me, why should desire be exclusive? Isn't competition the essence of life?" "Depends what the prize is," I said, "and whether people bleed over it." She leaned forward, eyes glinting. "And wouldn't that make it all the more thrilling? Art, death, desire, aren't they intertwined?" She was enjoying herself too much. Either she was innocent of the letters, or she was their author, and this was her theatre. But her cool composure didn't match the perfume-soaked drama of our note. She liked shadows, not flourishes. By evening, I was back at the brownstone with notes, contradictions, and one pounding headache. Wolfe listened, brow furrowed. When I finished, he said, "So. Sayers fears, Channing conceals, Kestrel provokes, each motive distinct, yet all are entwined with the auction." "Yeah," I said. And while they play tug-of-war, someone's walking into this house to rearrange your pens. Saul see anything yet? As if on cue, the phone rang. I grabbed it. Saul's voice came low and steady. Archie, someone just tried your back alley. Tall, slim, dark coat. Could be a mystery woman. But she didn't come in. Just stood there staring at the windows for 5 minutes, then left. Follow? I asked. Already on it, Saul said, and hung up. I relayed the update. Wolfe closed his eyes. She wishes to unsettle us further. Each gesture is calculated, but she risks overindulgence. I sat down. So what's the move? We've got Sayers half mad, Channing covering up, Kestrel auditioning for Villain of the Year, and now someone circling the brownstone like a moth around a lamp. You want me to sit on my hands until the auction? Wolfe's eyes opened. No. Tomorrow you will visit the Vandermeer estate. Not the auction, the grounds. Learn what you can. The setting of a drama shapes its performance. That was Wolfe. While suspects spilled words and perfume, he wanted soil under his fingernails, metaphorically speaking. That night, I couldn't shake the image of the woman in the alley, staring at the brownstone, watching us, waiting. If it was Kestrel, she was playing bold. If not, then we had a new player on the board. Either way, the game was tightening, and Wolfe didn't like games unless he wrote the rules. The next morning, I made the trip to Long Island. The Vandermeer estate loomed at the end of a winding drive lined with half-dead trees. Midnight Hall, they called it, though in daylight it looked like any other mansion past its prime. Shutters crooked, ivy crawling like green veins, windows dull, but I could feel it. A house remembers. A caretaker let me in after I bluffed my way through with a story about being an advance reporter. The inside smelled of dust, varnish, and faint mildew. The ballroom had been cleared for the auction, rows of chairs set up like pews, a podium waiting for the gavel. I spotted the glass cases holding smaller items, silver, watches, books, and in the corner, a locked cabinet that I guessed held the journals. I asked the caretaker about security. He shrugged. Doors will be guarded. Guests screened, but you know how it is. Money talks, rules walk, which meant anyone with a fat wallet or sharp mind could slip through. I left the estate with a taste of mildew and foreboding in my mouth. By the time I got back to the city, Saul had left a note. He'd trailed the dark-coated woman to a hotel near Gramercy. Registered under the name Anne French. No record beyond that. Fake name, real shadow. When I told Wolfe, his lips tightened. Anne French. The French perfume. Our trespasser signs her work. That was the moment it clicked for me. The woman wasn't just rattling us. She was branding the game. And Wolfe had no intention of letting her keep the stage. The name Anne French sat between us like a spider in the parlor, too delicate to squash, too dangerous to ignore. Wolfe had rolled it on his tongue like a sommelier tasting a wine, savoring the notes of perfume, fraud, and insolence. He didn't speak again for several minutes, and when he did, it was with the kind of certainty that makes the air feel heavier. She signs her work, he murmured. Our intruder believes herself an artist. She leaves fragrance, she leaves posture, she leaves aliases like brushstrokes. This is not clumsiness, Archie. It is theater. She wishes to be recognized, feared, pursued. Fine, I said. Then we're pursuing. Saul's got her hotel. All I need is your nod, and I'll be pounding on the door of Anne French, perfume and all. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. No, do not disturb her yet. To strike prematurely is to yield control. Let her believe we are reacting, not acting, which meant more waiting. Wolfe and Patience are lovers. Me and Patience aren't even on speaking terms. But Wolfe had already retreated into that thinking place of his, so I kept my mouth shut and jotted notes. The next 2 days dragged like wet shoes. Saul kept the hotel under watch. reporting that Anne French moved rarely, always at night, never with company. She came and went like a ghost, leaving no trail but that shadow of perfume. Meanwhile, the auction crept closer, and the suspects sharpened their claws. On Wednesday, Lionel Sayers called me in a panic. I found him pacing his office, tie loose, face pale. "She was here," he said, thrusting an arm toward his desk. A single rose lay across it, dark red, petals trembling in the draught from the window. A note pinned to the stem read, "Desire has thorns." "She means me," he gasped. "Kestrel. She'll ruin me, Archie. I swear she'll kill me." I took the note, pocketed it, and told him to sit down before he vibrated through the floorboards. He was unraveling faster than cheap thread. That same afternoon, I visited the Channings. Mrs. Channing received me this time, but the mask of pearls had slipped. She was brittle, her hands restless, tapping against the porcelain teacup. "The journals must not leave the family," she said suddenly, as if rehearsed. "They contain nothing but idle gossip, but it would be unwise to let them scatter." "Unwise for who?" I asked. Her lips tightened. "For society." Which society, she didn't say, but I'd bet my next paycheck there was something in those journals sharp enough to draw blood. Then there was Adria Kestrel. I cornered her again outside her gallery. She laughed when I mentioned roses. "Poor Lionel," she said. "He sees death in every flower." "Perhaps he should retire." Her smile thinned. "But roses wilt. Paintings endure. That is why the portrait belongs to me." She turned away with the finality of a curtain dropping, leaving me holding more suspicions than answers. Back at the brownstone, I relayed everything. Wolfe listened, expression still as stone, but when I laid the rose and the note on his desk, his nostrils flared. "The hand is the same," he said. "Theatrical, florid, deliberate. This Anne French weaves symbols to amplify fear. Roses, phrases, perfume, trespass. She choreographs dread." "Then what's her endgame?" I asked. "She wants Sayers scared, Channing's cornered, Kestrel entertained, and us rattled. What's left?" Wolfe didn't answer. He reached for beer instead, sipped, and stared at the ceiling. I knew better than to push. That night, Saul phoned. "Archie," he said, voice calm but urgent. "Your Anne French just met with somebody. Tall man, grey hat, looked like money and nerves. I tailed him after. You won't like this." It was Channing, the husband, that snapped things into focus like a chalk outline. The Channings weren't just worried about journals. They were in direct contact with our mysterious artist of dread. I told Wolfe. He opened his eyes wide for the first time all day. "Excellent," confirmation. "They seek to control perception, not merely objects." "Then Channing's our guy," I said. "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "But perhaps not. He may be a patron or a pawn. Anne French plays a careful game. Do not simplify it, Archie. Complexity is her weapon." The following day, the trespasser struck again, but this time Saul was ready. He called at dawn. "She went in, Archie. I saw her slip past your stoop. 15 minutes. Came out empty-handed. I couldn't risk following inside, but when she left, she smiled. Like she knew she'd been seen." That made Wolfe furious, in the way only Wolfe can be furious. Motionless, but radiating enough heat to wilt orchids. He stared at the blotter where the letter and rose now lay side by side. Trophies of intrusion. "Archie," he said, voice deep as thunder. "No more." She has presumed too far. Tonight, we bait the trap. Invite Sayers, the Channings, and Miss Kestrel here at once. Inform them it concerns the auction. Their reactions will serve as canvas. Anne French will provide the brushstroke I didn't argue. By evening, I had 3 reluctant guests confirmed, all showing varying shades of curiosity and dread. Sayers practically whimpered his acceptance. Channing's secretary called back with a terse, "Yes," and Kestrel answered herself, purring that she'd never decline an evening at Wolfe's. Wolfe spent the hours before their arrival in silence, sipping beer and occasionally glancing at the blotter. Fritz polished the silver until it gleamed like judgment. I set up chairs, checked sight lines, made sure the office looked like a courtroom instead of a lounge. When the bell rang at 8, the first guest stepped into the room. Lionel Sayers, gaunt, twitching, sweat already dampening his collar. He sat, hands clutching his knees like they might float away. Next came the Channings, Mr. Stiff as iron, Mrs. Brittle as porcelain. They occupied the couch with the grim dignity of statues. Finally, Adria Kestrel glided in, black silk again, eyes gleaming as though she'd been waiting her whole life for this stage. They barely had time to exchange stiff greetings when Wolfe lifted a hand. Enough. You are here because a threat has been made. Not merely against an auction, but against life itself. You have each received gestures, warnings, or symbols. You know this, they shifted, some denying, some nodding, but none outright surprised. And yet, Wolfe continued, the author of this theatre is not content to let you stew in private fare. She intrudes, she trespasses, she brands herself Anne French. His gaze swept across them. Which of you will admit acquaintance? Silence thickened, but I watched their faces. Sayers trembled, Mrs. Channing flushed, Kestrel smiled wider, and Mr. Channing's jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. Wolfe's trap was working, and all we had to do was wait for the first thread to snap. The office had the atmosphere of a jury box stuffed too tight. Wolfe hadn't moved an inch since announcing the name Anne French, but the weight of his words pressed down on everyone else. Sayers squirmed. Mrs. Channing's hand twitched against her pearls, Kestrel crossed her legs with deliberate grace, and Mr. Channing's jaw muscles kept flexing like he was trying to grind granite into dust. The air smelled of Fritz's polish, the faint trace of Wolfe's beer, and something sharper, tension layered with perfume that had no business being there. Wolfe let the silence stretch until it squeaked. Then, softly, he asked, Who among you has sought to cloak themselves in anonymity while guiding events? Nobody rushed to volunteer. That would have been too easy. So I leaned against the wall, arms folded, and let my eyes roam. The trick with suspects isn't to watch their faces when they're talking. It's to watch them when Wolfe is. Sayers wiped his brow with a trembling handkerchief. He looked like he'd confess to jaywalking if Wolfe kept staring at him. Mrs. Channing sat rigid, the picture of denial. Kestrel was different. She was smiling, faint, amused, like she'd come to the theatre and found the actors didn't know their lines. And Channing, he was too still, the kind of still that comes when a man wants to run but refuses. Wolfe's gaze lingered on him. Mr. Channing, you have met her. Channing's head jerked. Preposterous. Your denial is poorly timed, Wolfe said. My assistant has it on authority that you were observed conversing with a woman who calls herself Anne French. She does not conceal her scent, her posture, her deliberate symbols. She has approached you. Why? Channing's lips thinned. I don't know what you mean. Mrs. Channing turned her head sharply toward him, eyes wide, then schooled her face. That reaction told me more than words. Wolfe saw it too. He said nothing more to them. Instead, he turned his attention to Sayers. You, sir, received a rose and a threat. You tremble, but not merely from fear. There is desperation. That portrait, why does it hold such weight? Sayers swallowed, his Adam's apple jerking. It's valuable. Rare, bah, Wolfe said, voice sharp enough to slice. Value does not induce terror. You fear losing it not because of what it is, but because of what it contains. Speak, Sayers' fingers twisted the handkerchief until it tore. The portrait. The sitter is my ancestor, a great-grandmother, Flemish-born, proof of bloodline. Without it, my claim, my legitimacy, could be questioned. His voice cracked. Kestrel knows. She wants it to shame me. That drew a soft laugh from Kestrel, low and melodious. Oh, Lionel, you make yourself too easy. I want it because it pleases me, nothing more. Your panic is your own, but Wolfe's eyes narrowed. He'd found a pulse. So, Sayers fears ruin, Kestrel desires possession, the Channings dread revelation. Each of you has reason to want others discredited, even destroyed. Yet our phantom, Anne French, weaves her theatre around you all. She feeds your fears. Why? The silence that followed was thick enough to spread on toast. Then the phone rang. It startled everyone but Wolfe, who inclined his head toward me. I answered. Saul's voice came through, low and taut. Archie, she's on the move. Left the hotel, dark coat again. Heading your way, I glanced at Wolfe. His brows lifted in satisfaction. Excellent. The spider approaches the web. I hung up and relayed it. That was enough to make Sayers lurch half out of his chair. She's coming here? God help us. Sit, Wolfe ordered. Sayers, Saturday. The minutes crawled. Wolfe said nothing more, but the air in the room thickened. Then the bell rang, crisp and final. Fritz appeared, his usual calm ruffled by a flicker of unease. A lady, he said. She gives no name. Admit her, Wolfe said. And there she was. Tall, slim, dark coat, face shadowed by a wide hat. The scent hit first, sharp citrus, smoke, unmistakably the perfume from the letter. She stepped into the office with the poise of someone walking onto a stage they had designed. Good evening, she said, voice low, cultured. I see my audience has gathered. Sayers whimpered. The Channings stiffened. Kestrel's smile widened as though she'd just been handed a mirror. I closed the door behind her. She glanced at me, eyes cool, then fixed on Wolfe. You received my invitation. I did, Wolfe said. His tone was colder than winter stone. You presume too much. Do I? She said lightly, drifting to the center of the room. A house like this, a man like you, so insulated. I wished to stir you from your fortress. And here you are, surrounded by the very souls you must judge. I moved closer, ready to intercept if she made a wrong move, but she didn't so much as twitch toward her coat pocket. She was playing for words, not bullets. Wolfe's glare deepened. You choreograph dread. Perfume, roses, notes. You trespass, you observe, you manipulate. To what end? She tilted her head. To reveal, to test, to force truths into light. These people, she gestured with a slender hand toward the others, wear masks thicker than stone. I prefer them shattered. Kestrel laughed softly. A dramatist. How charming, not dramatist, Wolfe said. Saboteur, you endanger lives. The threat of death was explicit. And perhaps true, she said calmly. At Midnight Hall, masks will fall. One will not rise again. Sayers nearly collapsed. Mrs. Channing gasped. Mr. Channing's knuckles whitened. Wolfe leaned forward. You are reckless. But you are not omnipotent. Your game, Anne French, ends when I say it ends. Her eyes glinted. Then say it, Nero Wolfe. Reveal me, reveal them. That's what you crave, isn't it? The room bristled with tension. Everyone's secrets hung in the air, heavy as storm clouds. Wolfe's lips pressed thin, and I could tell he was close to pulling the threads together, close to forcing the truth out of her and the rest. But not yet. He was waiting, as always, for the perfect moment to spring the trap. And as Anne French stood there, perfume thickening the air, I realized we weren't just in a mystery anymore. We were in a play written by her hand, with Wolfe determined to seize the pen before the final act turned bloody. Anne French didn't ask for a seat. She claimed one, lowering herself into the red leather chair across from Wolfe's desk with a kind of lazy confidence that would have looked good on a panther. The perfume spread with her, that same sharp citrus threaded with smoke, and I swear it felt like she was using the air itself to write her name across the room. Wolfe watched her with eyes narrowed, one hand resting on the arm of his chair as if steadying himself against the intrusion. The others, Sayers trembling, the Channings stiff as iron, Kestrel leaning back with her satisfied little smile, were caught in the same net. "You wanted me here," she said, folding one gloved hand over the other. "Or perhaps I wanted to be here. The distinction hardly matters. We are all assembled. The auction's ghosts have come early." Her voice was controlled, cultured, a tone trained for drawing rooms. But it wasn't the voice of someone who belonged in this office, not in Wolfe's sanctum. That was the thing about her. She treated every place like a stage, and every word like a line she'd written herself. Wolfe finally spoke. "You presume too much, madam. You deliver threats with roses, trespass in my house, brand yourself with perfume and aliases. Do you expect applause?" She smiled faintly. "Applause? No. Attention, yes, and I have it." Her eyes shifted to Sayers, who shrank back as though she'd reached across and touched him. "You, Lionel. You've been so easy to rattle. A portrait, a bloodline, a name. You fear exposure more than death itself." Sayers choked out a protest. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she said. "You cling to that portrait because it proves what you are, or what you claim to be." Wolfe lifted a finger, and the interruption cut sharper than any shout. "Enough. You speak as though omniscient, yet your knowledge is selective. You taunt, you manipulate, but you have not acted. If you intended death, it would already have come. Your purpose is not murder." She tilted her head, intrigued. "Then what is it, Mr. Wolfe?" "You seek to force confession," Wolfe said calmly. "Not your own, but theirs. You pressure each of them to reveal what they fear. It is crude psychology masquerading as artistry." Her smile faltered, just for a second. The silence stretched again. Mrs. Channing's pearls clicked as her hands fidgeted. Her husband sat rigid, gaze locked on Wolfe, jaw clenched hard enough to crack. Kestrel looked delighted, like she'd bought a ticket to the best show in town. Wolfe's gaze landed on Mr. Channing. "You, sir, have already met this woman." "That is not conjecture. It is fact. My operative observed you. Denials waste our time. Why did you seek her counsel?" Channing's face reddened. "I don't," Wolfe cut in. "Your wife's earlier clumsiness betrayed you. She fears the journals contain truths that would unseat families, perhaps your own. You turned to this. Anne French to silence or control the threat. Did you imagine she would serve you?" Mrs. Channing's composure broke. "We had no choice," she burst out, voice sharp with strain. "Those journals, if they contain what we believe, they could destroy more than us. Old scandals, financial dealings, names that should remain buried. We thought—" She stopped, pressing her lips tight. "You thought to contain them," Wolfe said. "But secrecy invites parasites." You found one. Anne French's smile returned, thin and cutting. "They wanted control, Mr. Wolfe. I offered theater instead. Theirs is a world of pearls and polished shoes. Mine is a world of truths. I gave them fear so they might speak." Sayers shook his head violently. "You're mad. This isn't theater. It's torment." "Is it not the same?" she countered. Wolfe exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate. "You mistake cruelty for revelation. Yet you have stumbled on something useful." His gaze swept the room. "Each of you is guilty of concealment. Sayers of his fragile heritage, the Channings of old sins bound in journals, Miss Kestrel of—" Kestrel leaned forward, smiling wider. "Oh, do tell, Mr. Wolfe. What sin do I hide?" "You are a voyeur," Wolfe said coldly. You crave possession not for its own sake, but for the thrill of watching others break. You delight in ruin, even if you cause none yourself. Your presence is parasitic. It corrodes. Her laugh rang out, low and amused. Perhaps. But parasites survive. It was then that the room shifted. For the first time, Anne French looked unsettled, her fingers tightening against each other. Wolfe had redirected the spotlight, not letting her control the scene, and she knew it. "You play games," Wolfe said, "but you underestimate mine. Your trespasses, your perfume, your roses, they are breadcrumbs, not brilliance. You wish to be pursued. You are. You wish to unsettle. I am unmoved, and you wish to expose secrets. That will occur. On my terms, not yours." The weight of his voice settled on the room like stone. No one spoke. Even Fritz, waiting just outside, seemed to hold his breath. Finally, Anne French leaned back. "Then do it, Mr. Wolfe. You claim control? Take it. Reveal them. Prove you are more than an orchid keeper with a loud assistant." Wolfe's lips twitched. It might have been amusement, or it might have been disdain. "Patience," he said softly. "The auction is not yet begun. But make no mistake, its stage is already mine." The silence that followed was taut, electric. For the first time I saw the cracks forming, not just in the suspects, but in Anne French herself. She'd strutted in like a playwright dictating the acts, but Wolfe had shifted the ground beneath her, and everyone in that room felt it. Sayers slumped, drained. The Channings looked cornered, eyes darting like trapped birds. Kestrel, still smiling, now looked almost wary, and Anne French. Her hands trembled ever so slightly, though she masked it with another smooth smile. Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes, the gesture of a man who had just declared check but not yet checkmate. And I knew then, as surely as I've ever known anything in Wolfe's office, that the real play had only just begun. Anne French lingered in the red leather chair as if she owned it, but the tremor in her hands betrayed what the smile tried to smother. Wolfe had cracked her veneer, and once Wolfe begins the process, the pieces only fall one way. The others were caught in the wake. Sayers looking like a balloon with its air leaking out, the Channings twisted tight with dread, and Kestrel amused but with an edge now, as though she'd just realized the play might end with her name on the bill instead of the credits. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum from the refrigerator in the kitchen and the soft clink of Fritz rearranging dishes just out of sight. Wolfe let it ride long enough to make them sweat, then spoke in that low, weighted way of his. "You have all been manipulated," he said. "Anne French has constructed symbols, trespasses, threats, but the effect is achieved only because you already possess fear worth feeding. She has not invented your secrets. She has merely teased them into light." Sayers cleared his throat, weak and ragged. "If it's true, if she's just playing games, then why the letter about murder? Why say a man would die?" "Because," Wolfe said, "fear is incomplete without finality. The threat of death sharpens anxieties that otherwise might dull. Yet it is not her hand that seeks blood. She is catalyst, not executioner, which means, gentlemen and ladies, that one of you intends violence." That statement was a thunderclap. The Channings stiffened. Sayers whimpered. Kestrel actually leaned forward, delighted, as though Wolfe had just turned the key in a mystery novel she'd been desperate to finish. Anne French herself stayed still, her smile faint but strained. Wolfe went on, relentless. "The Vandermeer journals? The Flemish portrait. These are not trifles. They are fulcrums. Whoever possesses them gains leverage, and whoever is deprived loses more than possessions. Thus, the threat was no empty theater. It is prophecy. Unless I intervene, I caught the flick of Mrs. Channing's eyes toward her husband. He sat rigid, gaze fixed on Wolfe, but his hands tightened on his knees. That was enough for me to mark him as the man most likely to boil over when the gavel dropped at Midnight Hall. Anne French spoke then, soft but sharp. "You think I am harmless? That I am only words, perfume, roses? Do not underestimate the theatre, Mr. Wolfe. Words wound deeper than blades. I can destroy them without lifting a finger. You can fluster them," Wolfe corrected. "But destruction requires substance. You lack it. You are parasite, not predator." That one landed. She flinched, just a fraction, but in Wolfe's office, fractions are damning. The pressure was mounting, and Wolfe knew it. He gestured to me. "Archie, the notes." I pulled from my pocket the scraps we'd collected. The original letter, the rose's threat, the line left in Sayre's office. I spread them across the blotter. The handwriting curled elegant, looping, melodramatic. Wolfe studied them, then turned his gaze on our guests. "Observe. The phrasing is extravagant, the metaphors overwrought. One consistent trait is indulgence, yet the wording shifts subtly. A man will die. The price of desire is blood. Desire has thorns. Each phrase addresses a different fear. Each is tailored by her," Sayre said, pointing a shaking finger at Anne French. "Not entirely," Wolfe said. "The tailoring required knowledge. Intimate knowledge of each of you. Who supplied it? That landed like a dropped chandelier." Sayre stared, then turned to Kestrel. "You. You gossip, you pry, you—" Kestrel laughed, smooth as silk. "I don't bother with Lionel's little secrets. They fall out of him without my help." Wolfe rumbled low in his chest. "Miss Kestrel is correct. To tailor these threats, one needed specifics, heritage, scandal, journals. That knowledge is not hers. It comes from one who has lived beside such truth for years." Mrs. Channing gasped, hand flying to her pearls. Mr. Channing's jaw set harder. "This is absurd," he said. "Baseless conjecture." "Not conjecture," Wolfe said. "Evidence. My operative observed you with Anne French. You sought her services. You believed her capacity for theatre could intimidate rivals, protect your family from the journal's revelations. You engaged her as tool, not ally." Anne French turned her head, eyes narrowing at him. "He sought me. He fed me truths to use. I made them sharper, louder, but he brought them first." The room rippled. Mrs. Channing's composure cracked entirely, tears glinting at the corner of her eyes. "You promised me it would be contained," she hissed at her husband. "You promised me no one would know." Channing's face darkened. "And no one would if this meddler had not—" "Silence!" Wolfe snapped. The word rang out like a gavel. "You sought to harness fear, Channing. But in doing so, you revealed yourself as the source. The trespasses, the notes, the roses, all convenient. But your hand guided them. You sought not merely to silence scandal, but to eliminate rivals." He shifted his gaze to Sayre's. "You. The portrait's significance endangers you. Remove you, and your claim dissolves." Convenient for Channing Sayre's sagged, face grey. Then to Kestrel. "You who delights in torment but reveals nothing yourself. Your bidding might expose matters Channing prefers, hidden. Remove you, and the journal's secrets pass without interference." Kestrel arched a brow, but her smile thinned. Finally, Wolfe turned back to the Channings. "Thus the prophecy. A man will die at Midnight Hall. Channing, you planted it, and French embroidered it. But the intent, blood at the auction, was yours." The silence that followed was suffocating. Channing's lips parted, then closed. His wife wept quietly, pearls rattling faintly. Anne French stared at him, expression unreadable, though her hands were tight fists. Wolfe leaned back. "You sought to use me as pawn, to deliver me a riddle and watch me dance. You erred. I do not dance. I dictate, and I will dictate the end of this." For once, nobody spoke. not even Kestrel. The weight of Wolfe's voice had filled the office to bursting, and all that remained was the question of how the trap would spring. And in that moment, as Anne French sat silent and Channing's mask threatened to slip entirely, I realized Wolfe wasn't just solving a puzzle. He was turning their theater into his courtroom, and the verdict was on its way. The office was so heavy with silence, you could have bottled it. Wolfe had laid his charge against Channing, and the man sat there rigid, like marble cracking under its own weight. His wife stared at him with wet eyes, and the pearls around her neck clicked faintly as if they were grinding judgment into her skin. Lionel Sayers looked ready to bolt, and Kestrel Dammer was the only one who seemed entertained. Anne French sat still, but her eyes burned, and I knew Wolfe had hit something raw. He didn't press yet. Wolfe knew when to let silence do the work. I leaned against the wall, ready to catch Sayers if he keeled over. The man was shaking so bad his knees rattled like dice in a cup. Finally, Wolfe spoke, his tone low and deliberate. "Channing, you attempted to harness another's theater to preserve your own standing. You engaged this woman, gave her knowledge, asked her to sow fear. But you miscalculated. Fear spreads beyond leash or measure. It has returned to choke you." Channing's mouth opened, then shut again. He looked at his wife, at the floor, at his own clenched hands. "I didn't," he began. But the words died. Anne French cut in, her voice sharp. "He begged for it. He came to me whispering of journals, of secrets, of ruin. He wanted rivals cowed before the auction. He wanted them broken so the bidding would fall silent. I gave him what he asked." And more, Wolfe's eyes slid to her. "More indeed. You trespassed in my house. You dared to arrange props on my desk. You threatened with roses. All theater, designed to elevate yourself from tool to playwright. You overreached." Her smile was brittle. "And yet you listened, didn't you? You are here, drawn into it. I am here," Wolfe said, "because you attempted to make me pawn." "That, madam, I do not forgive." Sayers found his voice, though it quavered like a saw on metal. "So what happens now? We sit here and watch while she decides which of us dies." "No," Wolfe said simply. "You will all attend the auction as planned. But you will do so under my scrutiny, and when the final gavel falls, the hand prepared to kill will be revealed." That snapped Sayers into fresh panic. "Revealed? But if someone intends murder, shouldn't we stop the auction?" "No," Wolfe said. "Stopping it would forfeit the opportunity. Murder thrives in shadows. I prefer light. At Midnight Hall, the stage will be brightest." The Channings flinched at the word murder. Mrs. Channing's tears slipped unchecked now, and her husband looked like a man strung on wires too tight. Anne French crossed her legs, pretending nonchalance but curling her gloved fingers against her knee. Kestrel, of course, broke the tension with a laugh. "Delicious," she said. "A midnight play with blood promised and Nero Wolfe as stage manager. I would not miss it for the world." Wolfe ignored her. He turned his head toward me. "Archie, escort them out. They know what they must do. Then prepare Saul. He will shadow. The auction must proceed." That was dismissal, Wolfe style. I ushered them one by one. Sayers bolted out like a man fleeing fire. The Channings left together, brittle and silent, the space between them wider than a canyon. Kestrel winked at me, which I ignored, and Anne French paused at the door long enough to say, "The stage is mine, Wolfe. Don't forget it." He didn't answer. He never answers taunts. When the door closed, I came back in. Wolfe hadn't moved. He stared at the blotter with its neat arrangement of threats. His eyes were half shut, but I knew the wheels were turning like turbines. "You sure about this?" I asked. "We let them all gather at Midnight Hall. Somebody's liable to go down for real." "Yes," Wolfe said, and only in that crucible will truth separate itself. Murder is not prevented by smothering, it is prevented by exposure. That was Wolfe. He'd rather walk suspects into a trap than pull them out of one, and I had the job of making sure the trap was sprung at the right time. The next day was a blur of legwork. Saul reported that Anne French kept close to her hotel but made short trips to meet with men whose names I couldn't pin yet. He tailed her clean, but she was careful. Never the same route twice, never a predictable pace. She was a woman who liked leaving trails as riddles. I paid another visit to Sayers, partly to keep him from collapsing before the show. He was half drunk already, muttering about the portrait, about bloodlines, about shame. If I don't get it, Archie, I'm finished. They'll know I don't belong. They'll tear me apart. Who's they? I asked. He waved a hand. Everyone. Society. People with names carved in stone. I'm paper compared to them. That portrait is my shield. He was unraveling fast, but murder? I wasn't sure he had the steel. The Channings were quieter, but I caught Mrs. Channing outside a church, slipping in for confession. She looked a wreck, pearls twisted, eyes darting. I didn't follow her in, but when she came out, she looked worse, not better. Whatever those journals held, it was cutting her to the bone. And Kestrel. She was enjoying herself too much, hosting a private showing of rare vases and laughing too loudly when someone mentioned the Vandermeer sale. For her, the danger was wine with bubbles, heady, amusing, not real. By evening, back at the brownstone, Wolfe was already in position. He had beer at his elbow, books at hand, and silence like armor. I gave him the day's round. He listened, nodded once. Each motive strengthens, he said. Sayers, shame, Channing's, scandal, Kestrel, spite. But only one has sought the theatre of Anne French. Only one has plotted blood. At Midnight Hall, that hand will tremble, and I will see it. He lifted his glass and sipped. I leaned against the desk, arms folded. And if they try to act before you can point the finger, he closed his eyes. Then, Archie, you will act. I rely on your reflexes, not mine, which was Wolfe speak for saying the case was about to crest. Midnight Hall was waiting, its dusty ballroom already staged, and all the players were on script, whether they liked it or not. And I couldn't shake the thought that the woman calling herself Anne French, with her perfume and her theatre, would have the final bow, unless Wolfe tore the curtain down first. The night of the auction draped itself over Long Island like a curtain before the final act. Midnight Hall, hulking and ivy-choked, loomed at the end of its drive with windows glowing dimly against the dark. Cars lined the gravel approach. Sleek machines driven by men in tuxedos and women in gowns, all carrying the kind of money that buys not just objects, but histories. Inside, the ballroom had been scrubbed of dust and rigged with rows of chairs, a podium for the auctioneer, and glass cases that glittered under electric chandeliers. The air smelled of polish and anticipation, with an undertone of mildew that no amount of preparation could erase. I stuck close to Wolfe as he was escorted to a corner seat that had been cleared for him. He hadn't wanted to leave the brownstone, but the storm had to break here, and even Wolfe understood when the mountain must be carried to the valley. Fritz had packed his comforts into the car, Saul shadowed the perimeter, and I was on hand to move if things snapped. Wolfe settled into his chair with a sigh that carried a month's worth of resentment. The suspects, our cast, filed in with the rest of the audience. Lionel Sayers looked hollowed out, suit hanging loose, eyes darting at shadows like he expected knives to leap from them. The Channings were brittle, arm in arm but with space between them, pearls tight on her neck, jaw set on his. Adria Kestrel floated in, radiant in black silk again, smiling like she'd orchestrated the whole thing herself. And then, almost last, came Anne French, the perfume preceding her, the dark coat sweeping behind. She didn't bother with an alias now. She wanted to be seen. The auctioneer opened with silverware and tapestries, his gavel cracking like a gunshot after each sale. The crowd murmured. Bid murmured again. Prices climbed in neat increments, hands rose and fell, but under it all was tension that had nothing to do with antiques. Sayers flinched at every gavel strike. The Channings whispered behind clenched teeth. Kestrel's smile sharpened with each lot, and Anne French sat utterly still, eyes glinting as if waiting for her cue. Lot 73 approached, the journals. I watched Wolfe carefully, his eyes opened, sharp, alert. The auctioneer announced them, describing the fragile volumes in glowing terms, hinting at family history and private reflections. Bidding started high. Kestrel raised her paddle first, her smile widening as if daring the others. Channing countered almost immediately, jaw rigid. Sayers didn't move, his hands locked to his knees. The price climbed. 10,000, 15, 20. Kestrel and Channing volleyed back and forth, each bid more defiant than the last. The crowd leaned in, murmuring, sensing the heat. At 25,000, Kestrel laughed aloud and raised again. Channing's face reddened. Mrs. Channing's hand gripped his arm, whispering something sharp, but he jerked away and raised his paddle higher. Wolfe stirred. He didn't lift his hand, but his voice carried across the row to me. Archie. That one word was enough. I stood, moving closer to the front, eyes scanning the crowd. Saul had edged in near the back, giving a subtle nod. He was watching Anne French. She had leaned forward, hands resting on her knees, smile faint but eager. She wasn't bidding, but she was watching every twitch of Channing's face. Feeding on it. The gavel hammered down at 30,000. Channing had won. His shoulders slumped with the victory, but his eyes blazed with something closer to fury than triumph. Kestrel clapped softly, mocking, and leaned back with a satisfied sigh. Then came the portrait, the Flemish woman who looked ready to leap from her frame. Sayers jerked upright, finally alive. His paddle shot up before the auctioneer finished announcing the lot. Kestrel followed instantly, smiling as if she'd waited all evening for this moment. Their duel began, and it wasn't genteel. Sayers' bids were frantic, desperate. Kestrel's were measured, deliberate, like someone teasing a child. The price climbed higher than anyone expected. 15, 20, 25. Sweat poured down Sayers' face. His hand trembled but kept rising. Kestrel tilted her head, enjoying the game, each of her bids punctuated by a faint laugh. And then Wolfe spoke, louder now, his tone carrying like a bell. Enough. The room froze. The auctioneer looked startled, gavel hovering. All eyes turned to Wolfe, massive and immovable in his chair, eyes fixed on Sayers. "Mr. Sayers," Wolfe said, "you bid not for art, but for survival. Yet survival cannot be purchased. Your fear has been manipulated, stoked, and displayed. Who promised you ruin if you failed?" Sayers shook his head wildly. "No one. Do not prevaricate," Wolfe thundered. His voice filled the hall, silencing whispers. "The notes, the roses, the phrases, they were tailored for you. Who whispered that your bloodline would be exposed?" Sayers' eyes darted toward the Channings. Just once, but it was enough. The room stirred again. Mrs. Channing gasped, and her husband's hand clamped down on her wrist. She yanked it free, face pale as marble. "You promised," she hissed at him, loud enough for those nearest to hear. "You promised it would never come to this." The crowd buzzed, confused, intrigued. The auctioneer tried to bring his gavel down, but Wolfe lifted a hand, and even he froze. Anne French rose slowly from her seat, perfume drifting, voice calm. "There it is. Truth. He fed me the secrets. I spun them into roses and notes. I gave him theater. He gave me lies to dress in silk. Mr. Channing surged too, his feet red-faced, fists clenched. "She twists everything." "She wanted chaos. I gave her nothing but caution." "Liar," Anne French said softly. Wolfe leaned forward, voice like stone. "You engaged her to spread fear. You planned to unseat rivals, and when fear proved insufficient, you prepared for blood. The prophecy was yours, Channing. A man would die because you intended it." The hall erupted in whispers, gasps, the sound of people shifting in their chairs like waves against a pier. I moved closer, ready if Channing lunged. His hands trembled, and for a moment I thought he might actually draw something from his coat. But his wife grabbed his arm, desperate, and hissed, "Stop!" "It's over." Saul was there too, shadow at the edge of the room, eyes sharp, ready to strike if needed. Channing sagged, deflated, as though Wolfe's words had punctured him. The auctioneer lowered his gavel, stunned. Anne French sat back down, folding her hands, the faintest smile returning to her lips. She'd wanted theatre, and Wolfe had given her the full play. Wolfe closed his eyes, leaning back. The performance concludes. The truth has been spoken. Murder will not occur tonight. The chandeliers hummed faintly, casting their glow on faces tight with awe, fear, and resentment. Midnight Hall had hosted many auctions, but none like this, and as I stood there, heart still thudding, I realized Wolfe hadn't just solved the case. He'd seized the stage from Anne French and ended the play on his own terms. The ride back from Midnight Hall was quiet, except for the hum of the tires and Wolfe's steady breathing beside me. Saul had gone his own way after shadowing us clear of the estate, and Fritz was waiting at the brownstone with supper keeping warm. Wolfe sat with his eyes closed, the bulk of him leaning back into the leather as if he'd never moved from it. I knew that look. He wasn't sleeping. He was letting the pieces settle in the right slots. Inside, Fritz fussed over Wolfe's coat while I poured 2 glasses of beer. Wolfe accepted his without a word, and we sat in the office, the blotter still bearing the letter, the rose, the notes that had started this whole affair. They looked smaller now, like props after the curtain call. I broke the silence. "You sure Channing would have gone through with it?" "I mean, it looked bad, but he never drew a weapon. He might have just wanted the journals buried and left it at that." Wolfe opened his eyes, heavy and deliberate. He sought to ensure silence. Fear failed. His rage at the auction was not theatre. It was collapse. Given the opportunity, he would have killed Sayers, Kestrel, perhaps even his wife. Whoever threatened exposure. The intent was clear. That is sufficient. Anne French didn't help, I said. She liked pulling the strings too much. If he was the hammer, she was the hand pointing him at the nail. "She is parasite," Wolfe said, calm again. "Useful for exposure, dangerous for restraint." She believed herself dramatist, but in truth she was no more than spotlight. She revealed others, but nothing of substance herself. She walked out smiling, I reminded him. That looked like victory. Wolfe sipped his beer, lips pressing to the glass with deliberate care. Let her smile. She fed on dread, but dread is gone. She will wither. I have taken her theatre. She has nothing that was Wolfe. Cold, absolute. And I believed him. The rest of the night passed in quiet. Fritz served duck with chestnut stuffing, and Wolfe ate slowly, as though savoring both food and triumph. I tried not to think about the Vandermeer estate, the cracked voices, the chandelier-lit crowd that had watched a man come close to breaking. But Wolfe's words hung in the air. Intent was enough. He'd stopped the play before it turned bloody, and that was all the justice we were going to get. The next morning, the papers carried only whispers about drama at Midnight Hall. No names, no perfume, no mention of Wolfe. Just a line about an unusual interruption before the journals were quietly withdrawn from sale. Money had smoothed the cracks, as money always does. But the Channings would never sit as straight in society again. Sayers would sweat at every mention of lineage, and Kestrel would dine out on the story for years, laughing in salons at how Wolfe had thundered louder than the gavel. Anne French vanished. Saul checked her hotel 2 days later. The room was empty, no perfume lingering. She'd checked out under another name, no trace left behind, but the echo of her smile. Wolfe didn't ask for updates. He was done with her. By Thursday, the brownstone had returned to normal. Orchids upstairs, books downstairs, Fritz in the kitchen. Wolfe leaned in his chair, reading some obscure volume on Roman spice routes, while I filed notes and wondered how many more people thought fear was a currency they could spend without consequence. I asked him once, half joking, "You ever get tired of being dragged into other people's plays?" He didn't look up. "Theatre is tolerable, Archie, when one directs. Not when one is cast," that was his curtain line. I leaned back in my chair, watching him sip his beer, the office warm and quiet again. The letter was gone, the blotter clear, the brownstone restored. Trouble had walked in with perfume and roses, but Wolfe had done what he always does. Stayed rooted, pulled every thread tight, and reminded everyone that fear is a poor script when intellect holds the stage. And me? I had the job of writing down the performance so I could tell it later. Not a bad gig, all things considered.